Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body for the 13th of March 2023. As is normal, I will start by introducing my colleagues here on the top table. First of all, I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the Local Review Body and therefore always sit on this meeting, all the meetings. I have with me today two colleagues. On my right is Councillor Ian Massey. To my left is Councillor Dave Cuthbert. By requirement, we are all members of the Planning Committee. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is a planning advisor. He has had no involvement with any of these cases prior to the appeal to the Local Review Body. To my left is Mr. Jeff Fogg, who is our legal advisor, and to his left is Jess Guild, who is our Committee Services Officer. So going on our agenda this morning, if I may first of all ask my colleagues, do you have any declarations of independence? Councillor Cuthbert?
No.
And Councillor Massey?
No, none.
Thank you both. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 13th of February 2023. I am the only member obviously here who was on that meeting. I'm happy to approve the minutes as they stand. So with that in mind, we now move on to the first case on the agenda this morning, which is item 41, which is alterations to a garage workshop to form dwelling house land 40 metres northeast of El Dorado, Glenfoot, Abernethy. I'll ask Mr. Burton if you could introduce the case.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures I took on my site visit first. Could I have the first slide, please? This slide shows the application site outlined in red. You can see the access road from the main road and the fact that it's surrounded on one side by an open field and to the other side by the applicant's house. Next slide, please. This is the road leading to the application site. That's the access driveway just to the right. Next slide, please. And the road going the other direction. Next slide, please. So taken from the top of the access road, looking down towards the site, the application building is on the right-hand side, a single-storey timber construction. On the left-hand side, you can see the gable of the applicant's house, and between that and the road is a caravan, which had a temporary consent for ancillary accommodation, which is now expired. Next slide, please. A bit closer to the actual building, the building is on the right-hand side there, and to the right of the building is a field. Part of that field would be used for the garden area for the new house. And you can see just beyond the application site, you can see the edge of the settlement area. Next slide, please. That's the application building. The building to its left is not connected to it. That's a separate shed building. You can see that the original garage structure has been extended in the past to the left-hand side, a lean-to extension. Next slide, please. This is looking at it from the field with the field which would be partly used for the garden area for the new house. Next slide, please. Looking back up towards the main road, you can see the driveway is quite long, and you can see the caravan that stands also in the applicant's land. Next slide, please. That's looking towards the applicant's house, which is close to the application building. Next slide, please. Right, back to the aerial shot. Right, the planning permission is sought for the conversion of a detached garage and workshop to a detached house. The only external changes proposed are the formation of new doorways and windows and a flue from a wood-burning stove. The new house would have an open-plan lounge, kitchen, dining room, a bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, an office and a bathroom. A garden will be formed on two sides of the house from part of the surrounding field, and a hard standing area to the front will give access to the existing driveway, which also serves the applicant's house, which stands on the other side of the driveway. There's a static caravan located to the north of the house, providing ancillary accommodation, which had a temporary consent which lapsed in April 2022. To summarise the applicant's case, the garage workshop is now unused following the retirement of the applicant. The conversion work is proposed to be carried out by the applicant's son, who would then live in the house. To summarise the report of handling, the most applicable policy in the local development plan is Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, which states the development of single houses or groups of houses which fall within the 6 identified categories will be supported. These categories are building groups, infill sites, new houses in the open countryside on defined categories of sites, renovation or replacement of houses, conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings, or development on rural brownfield land. The only applicable category for consideration is Category 5 for the conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings. To be considered under this category, as detailed in the supplementary guidance, the building must be of traditional form and construction or non-traditional but otherwise of architectural merit, and which makes a positive contribution to the landscape and character of the surrounding area. The building is a large timber shed with low-pitched corrugated roof with a number of lean-to extensions. It does not meet the definition of a traditional building and is not of architectural merit that makes a positive contribution. The building cannot comply with the criteria under this category, and therefore no further consideration is given. Further, the building does not form part of a building group, is not infill development, is not accompanied by the supporting information required under new houses in open countryside, is not a replacement dwelling house, and does not meet the definition of rural brownfield. The principal development on the site does not therefore comply with Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan and supplementary guidance. One representation was received, giving grounds of the principle of residence development in the countryside and concerns over a private water supply. Material considerations: the application site is out with the settlement boundary, so Policy 19 Housing into Countryside is relevant. Also relevant from National Planning Framework 4, Policy 17 Rural Homes, the aim there is to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of more high quality, affordable and sustainable rural homes in the right locations. Observations on the proposal: the building proposed for conversion is apparently redundant. The decision which the committee must take today is whether it's sufficiently traditional in its design or materials, or of sufficient architectural merit to meet the terms of the policy. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
And Councillor Massey?
Yes, thank you. One question: it says in the report that it's for the son, but it says further on that's for the son and his 2 sons. Do you have any clarity on that? Is that big enough for 1 bedroom?
It does have 1 bedroom. It also has an office in the floor plan, which could potentially be used as a bedroom. It's small. It's a small house for that, I would imagine.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions either on this one. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any more information? Councillor Cuthbert?
I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor Massey?
Happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Cuthbert, can I ask you to lead off on this one?
Yeah, thank you, convener. I've been to look at the site from the road and from the Abernethy itself. I've tried to find a way that within the local development plan that we could actually give this consent, and I can't find one. And given this is a quasi-judicial process, I think we have to refuse this appeal on this occasion. I don't think it's a replacement of a traditional building, and I couldn't see any other categories under which it would fall within the Housing in the Countryside Act. So my position is we need to refuse this appeal.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Massey.
I'm in agreement with that, and we need to refuse this appeal.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. On this occasion, I'm fine. I must agree. I think that the whole thing links on is the traditional construction, which I think it probably isn't in the definition on this particular policy. In fact, the agent has actually mentioned that it was a former fire station and has been moved there, which I think strengthens the fact that it isn't traditional construction. And given that information, I know the officers tried to fit it into other policies, and I went and saw the site myself from both sides, from this side and from the Castle View, I think is the other road. But I have to say, in this occasion, I'm agreeing with the officer. It doesn't fulfil policy 19, subsection 5 of the guidance, and therefore I must agree with my two colleagues to refuse. So I'm sorry, on this occasion, we're going to have to refuse the appeal. Mr. Falk, anything on that? You're happy with that? Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, but on this occasion, it's a refusal. So members, we now move on to item 4.2, which is alterations and extensions to a dwelling house at 3 Glencairn Place, Abernethy, which I think this lady is the applicant. So Mr. Burton, if I could ask you to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures as usual. You can see the application site bounded in red. The application property sits at the end of a cul-de-sac in a corner of the cul-de-sac with woodland on one side and open countryside on the other side. Next slide, please. So this is the cul-de-sac. You can see the property at the far end of it on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. That's the application property. You can see a single-storey dwelling, although you can see there is accommodation within the roof from the gable window at high level. Next slide, please. And this is the rear view of the property. The conservatory that's shown there would be removed and replaced by a single-storey extension, and the small dormer on the centre of the roof would be replaced by a larger dormer. Next slide, please. That's looking up the garden towards the fields at the back of the house. Next slide, please. And looking back down towards the house, the proposed dormer would be half a metre in from each side of the roof plane. It would cover the rest of the roof plane. Next slide, please. And another one which shows the house in context. The other houses roundabout tend to be single-storey or single-storey in appearance. Next slide, please. That's the another aspect from the front. The front wouldn't change. The front slope of the roof would not be affected. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for a ground floor and first floor extension to a detached house in Glencairn Place in Abernethy. It's proposed to remove an existing conservatory and erect 2 ground floor extensions and a dormer extension all to the rear of the house. The ground floor extensions would provide a family room and utility room in WC. They would project 3.5 metres from the rear wall of the house and would be separated by a patio which would be 2.5 metres wide. The dormer would cover most of the rear slope of the roof and would provide an additional bedroom, a bathroom and a dressing room for the existing master bedroom. To summarise the applicant's case, the existing rear dormer is not visible from the public street and the proposed dormer would be similarly screened from view. The case officer's proposal to reduce the width of the dormer by a metre, 50 centimetres from each side, would have resulted in insufficient floor space in the upstairs bedrooms. The lack of a bat survey has been rectified by the submission of a bat roost survey, which concluded that following the preliminary roost assessment, which showed that the house had negligible bat roost potential because of its construction, and there being no signs of bats, no further surveys were required. To summarise the report of handling, the relevant development policies are policies 1A and 1B placemaking, policy 17 residential areas, and policy 41 biodiversity. The two proposed ground floor extensions would be subordinate additions to the existing house due to their design, height, scale, massing, finishing materials and siting. They respect the character and amenity of the house and are in accordance with the placemaking supplementary guidance and policies. However, the proposed dormer fails to meet the guidance set out in the supplementary guidance. In terms of its box design, the lack of interrelationship between the dormer's windows and the ground floor windows, the extensive use of timber cladding to the front face of the dormer, and the width of the dormer in comparison to the roof and its massing is detrimental to the character of the existing dwelling house. As such, the proposal is contrary to policy 1A. In terms of its design, scale and massing, the proposed dormer does not complement its surroundings and is also therefore contrary to policy 1B-C. During the application process, it was suggested that reducing the width on each side by 0.5 of a metre and pulling back the face of the dormer by a further half metre from the wall head may have been sufficient to reduce the impacts associated with the dormer. No revised proposals were provided. There are no concerns about overlooking of neighbouring properties, and the floor area of the proposal in relation to the area of the application site is considered acceptable, so the proposal is in accordance with policy 17 residential areas. There is woodland immediately to the west of the application property, so the Council's bat survey guidance requires a bat survey to be undertaken. A bat survey has not been submitted as part of the application. As such, it has not been demonstrated there are no bats present and that bats will not be affected by the proposal. As any impacts on bats cannot be fully considered, the proposal is contrary to Scottish Planning Policy, paragraph 214, and contrary to policy 41 of the Local Development Plan. The lack of a bat survey was raised with the agent prior to the determination of the application. In the interest of avoiding unnecessary additional costs, the applicant, it was suggested that it might be better to try and resolve the concerns about the design of the dormer before instructing a bat survey. No representations were received. Material considerations are as stated, policies 1A and 1B, 17 and 41 of the Local Development Plan. Some observations. The ground floor extensions proposed are considered acceptable in terms of policy and guidance. The proposed dormer is the only issue which has led to refusal of planning permission because of its width and appearance, and because it has not been demonstrated that there are no bats present. The latter point, however, has been addressed by additional information that's been submitted. A preliminary roost assessment has been carried out, which assesses the building as having negligible potential for bats. No sign of bats were found. The Council's biodiversity officer has consequently withdrawn her objection, and the case officer has confirmed in writing that the reason for refusal, citing the lack of a bat survey, is now not required. Thank you, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I have just one question myself. I had a walk around the property myself. I think the very limited view of that dormer in its present as applied for. I think only one angle you can actually see it. You had a photograph up there, I think, which showed that angle. I think that's all you could see, I think.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Councillor. If we could go to about the third, try the second slide in, that might show it from the road. Yeah, that shows it within its context, and you certainly can't see the dormer at present, which is very much in the centre of the roof. If the dormer to be built were there, proposed were there, I think that you'd be able to see a corner of it standing there.
I think I stood out at most places. I think a good wander around. I think it's only one place I think you could see it, which is further back, just in the right angle. But there we are. Councillor Massey, any questions from you?
No, thank you.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
No, I'm happy to proceed anyway.
So members, back to my sheet of paper. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Massey
Happy to proceed.
and Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, as I said, I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed, so I'll lead off on this one. As I said, I have visited the site, I've seen it. I did ring the doorbell, but nobody was in, and had a good wander around the streets. As it stands, we're happy with the extension itself, so it all comes down to the question of the dormer window. It is at the rear. I think there's only one angle I think you could see it from the road. So I feel on this occasion, I'm happy to grant the appeal. I think it should go ahead with any necessary conditions that we would put in for normal extensions. The size of dormer may affect the saleability of the property in future. That's down to the applicants and their own decision. But as it stands, given its limited view, very, very limited view from the road and from the front, I'm happy to grant the appeal on this occasion. So Councillor Massey.
I'm happy to agree with the grant the application as well.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Not sure I like this, but I also agree. I think that we should be consenting this. I can't see any reason why not. I also visited the site, but I actually had trouble being able to see into the back garden. I had to climb over a fence to get into the field behind to have a look, and I really can't see how this is going to impact anybody. Clearly, it's down to the developer in terms of the value of the property when they sell it. If it doesn't look good, it won't sell so well, but I would approve the appeal.
Okay, Mr. Fox, so we have a unanimous appeal to grant. I don't know if there's any special conditions that need to go in, but whatever normal ones going for an extension, I'll leave that with you.
Can I clarify, convener, with reference to the first reason for refusal, which is say non-compliance with, this is the planning officer's view, with policy 1A of the local development plan and also policy 1BC. Are you taking a different view that it does comply, or are you saying that it should be justified as a departure from the policy because of the limited visibility of it?
I'm saying it's a departure because of such a limited visibility of it.
Okay.
In the rear. Yeah.
Okay. For the purpose of it, is that the position of you all then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Fogg? Your appeal's been granted. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 4.3, which is the extension to a dwelling house and formation of roof terrace at 51 Muirs, Kinross. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. We'll go to the first slide, please, which shows the application site. The house, you can see the application site bounded in red. You can see just beyond the garden on the right-hand side there is the memorial garden associated with the church. The buildings above the application site are connected with the church, and there is a pub on the other side of the access road, across the access road from the application site. Behind the application site, beyond the memorial garden, is a car park for the rugby ground, which lies slightly further away. Next slide, please. That's for the front of the house. The extension, the porch extension, was added by the current occupants. Next slide, please. Looking down the side of the house, there was a previous application which was for much the same proposal, which was refused by the LRB, I think towards the end of last year, October or September, and that proposed extending the house to the side almost as far as the fence. This proposal does not do that. The gable of the house would remain as it is, with that gap existing. Next slide, please. Looking at the rear of the house where the extension would be sited, you can see to the right there's a shed which is part of the memorial garden for the church. Next slide, please. Looking down towards that memorial garden, you can see there's a large substantial hedge between the applicant's garden and the memorial garden. Next slide, please. This is looking from within the applicant's garden towards the church to the side. The buildings either side of the buildings just on the other side of the fence are buildings associated with the church. Next slide, please. And this is taken from the church side, looking towards the fence, which is the boundary to the application side. Next slide, please. Right, so 51 Muirs is a two-storey detached house bounded by a church hall to the north, a pub to the south, and the car park for the local rugby ground to the east. A rear extension is proposed with a large lounge dining room on the ground floor and a smaller extension to the main bedroom on the upper floor. A large roof terrace is proposed on top of most of the ground floor extension. An earlier application for a similar proposal was refused in April 2022, and the review was dismissed by the local review body on the 10th of October 2022. The changes which are proposed to the design, which was refused previously, do not alter the ground floor layout. The upper floor extension is narrower, projects slightly further from the rear wall, and has a pitched roof instead of a flat roof. The roof terrace is proposed on top of the downstairs extension as before. To summarise the applicant's case, the revised proposal has addressed the element of the previous design which is seen to be contrary to council policy and guidance, the flat roof of the two-storey element. This has been replaced by a pitched roof which has a ridge height below that of the existing house. The LRB had no problem with the roof terrace, so that is proposed to remain. To summarise the report of handling, the revised design of the two-storey extension has it sitting flush with the north gable end of the house and the eaves of the pitched roof tying into the eaves level of the house. This is an improvement to the previous proposed flat roof two-storey extension in terms of design, proportions, bulk, massing, and satisfactory integration with the house. The rooftop terrace is located within close proximity to the property boundaries. While no residential amenity would be impacted by the proposed terrace, given the combination of position, height, and close proximity of the terrace to its surroundings, it would have an imposing impact to the detriment of the amenity of the area and the adjacent church memorial garden and area of contemplation. This was one of the reasons for refusal of the previous application, which was upheld by the local review body. These concerns were further reiterated in post-refusal dialogue. The revised proposals do not address these concerns. It is noted that the revised proposal increases the area of rooftop terrace. While improvements have been implemented to the two-storey element of the proposal, the wraparound rooftop terrace and single-storey extension remains an unresolved concern. There were no representations to the application. Material considerations are policies 1A and 1BC, placemaking of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, and policy 17C of the Development Plan. Some observations. The revised proposal addresses one, but not both, of the reasons for refusal that were upheld by the LRB last year. The committee needs to decide whether the roof terrace is on its own sufficient reason to refuse planning permission. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
And Councillor Massey.
As am I, fine.
And I'm happy on this one as well. So again, I will ask members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any more information? Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor Massey.
As am I.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Cuthbert, could I ask you to lead off on this one?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, this is similar to the last site in some ways, because it is at the back of the house, and whilst you would think it would be easily observed, in fact it's got a pub on one side, and then it's got the KGV playing fields behind. I know the area quite well. My view is that the applicant appears to be trying to make the best use of the ground they've got available. I think with the redesign of the back part of the house with the terrace, I'm minded to agree to the appeal.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
I will also agree with the appeal.
Thank you. Which leaves it with me. This came up before the LRB, and at that time, although it was a majority decision to refuse, I was the minority who agreed to the thought of this extension. I think what we see now is an improvement on the extension side of itself. I appreciate the terrace is larger, and it is a little bit more of an overview to the church area, but the church have already agreed that they have no objections to this terrace. So on this occasion, I too am happy to grant the appeal, and feel there's enough reason to depart from the reasons given by the officer. Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision yet again.
Yeah, so the clarification I think that I would invite from you all, convener, is this being seen as actually complying with the background policies on which the planning officer found it to refuse it, as opposed to departing from them? That was my impression.
I think it's compliant, yes, on this one, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Right, so then we'll move on to the next item, which is a slightly larger one, a slightly unusual one. This is the erection of a cinema and community radio hub and associated works at 47 to 49 East High Street in Crieff. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce again.
Thank you, Chair. To take you through the pictures first, the application site bounded in red on the screen there. It's down. It has a narrow frontage to the main road and a longer frontage to Leaden Flower Street. It's currently occupied by the Crieff Hotel, which has an extension to the rear. You can see the flat roofed area just north of the car park is a more recent addition to the building. You can see that the application site has a public car park immediately adjacent to the south, and buildings, other buildings in the town centre surrounding on other sides. Next slide, please. So the hotel itself doesn't present in a great condition. I believe it's been vacant for a number of years. It's very traditional in form. You can see that there's a smaller extension which forms part of the hotel, which is also traditional to the local vernacular. Next slide, please. You can see the hotel from a slightly different angle. You can see the first extension to it, if you like, along the main road, and the later extension going down the hill, if you like, from the rear of the hotel. Next slide, please. And this is looking along the street from standing directly in front of the hotel, and you can see on the other side of the road is some more modern but still traditionally styled buildings, which are tie in to some extent with the traditional buildings in the town centre. Next slide, please. And looking the other direction towards the centre of Crieff, you can clearly see the more modern buildings on the right-hand side, with which are finished in render, and the stone buildings beyond that. Next slide, please. This is the building at the rear of the hotel. You can see the flat roof part of the extension to the hotel, which goes down the hill towards the public car park. Next slide, please. And looking at the building from the bottom of the existing hotel, looking back up towards the high street. Next slide, please. This is looking at it from the point of view of just across the road from the public car park. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the erection of a building containing 2 cinemas, a radio station, cafe and bookshop, a courtyard public space and a wild garden on the site of the former Crieff Hotel, which was built in 1901 and has been unused since 2017. The proposed building is modern in style with a flat roof which will have photovoltaic panels and areas of green roof. The site is located in Crieff Conservation Area, which is characterised by buildings of traditional design, mostly stone with slate roofs. To summarise the applicant's case, the former Crieff Hotel is in extremely poor condition and it would not be possible to convert it for the uses proposed. The proposed new building's design addresses the corner site, setting it back from the East High Street, will accommodate the movement of people and will create a new public space. The design will enhance the conservation area and suitable materials can be agreed with the council if a condition requiring that is attached to the consent. The applicant is also happy to use existing materials in the new building where possible, although it's noted that the condition of the existing building's materials is not known. It is also noted that the uses proposed in the application are acceptable to the council. To summarise the report of handling, the proposed reuse of the site as a cinema community radio hub is considered appropriate in the context of Policy 10, Town and Neighbourhood Centres, which supports leisure, recreation and community facilities. No finishing materials information has been submitted, but the drawings show white render with areas of stone and timber cladding and a sedum roof finish with PV panels on the main roof section. The proposed flat roof form is relatively low comparative to adjacent buildings and results in a horizontal emphasis which is at odds with the established streetscape. The extensive white render would appear particularly prominent and may present future maintenance issues in terms of staining and discoloration. The massing of the proposed building across the site is inconsistent with the surrounding built form and proportions, and the proposed north and east elevations do not present active frontages to the street. A contemporary design response is appropriate for an entirely new building, and there is scope for a prominent intervention here, given the very large corner site. The proposal to incorporate an open courtyard, wild garden, and other biodiversity enhancement measures are positive, particularly given the current dominance of cars and parking at this location. The overall design of the current scheme is not considered to be an appropriate response to the context, however, and the proposed wholesale demolition of the existing buildings on the site without due consideration of salvage and reuse of materials is not a sustainable approach. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 28A of Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, which sets out that development in the conservation area must preserve or enhance its appearance, and Policy 1A of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, which seeks to ensure that all new development respects the character and amenity of the area concerned. 2 public representations were received, one supporting the proposal but raising noise concerns, the other objecting on grounds of parking and construction traffic. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B and 28A of the local development plan are relevant, as is Historic Environment Policy for Scotland 2019. The principle, some observations, the principle of the proposed use is not an issue, but the design and finish of the proposed building is. Historic Environment Scotland did not object, but recommended some element of facade retention if possible. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. I'll open the, I think I've got a few questions, but I'll ask my colleagues first. So, Councillor Matt.
Yeah, I've got one question. The Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust, they're saying that the site's archaeologically sensitive. What does that mean? Does that mean that we have to put conditions on it, or?
That would mean if committee were minded to grant, then they might want to consider a condition requiring an archaeological survey when demolition takes place and before construction takes place.
During the demolition process?
I think, I'm not an expert on this, Councillor, but I would imagine that when the site is cleared would be an appropriate time for an archaeological survey of it. So after demolition, when the site is cleared and before any construction work starts, I would imagine would be the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert.
I've got no questions.
Just about a couple, if I may. Just to clarify the existing building, that hasn't been approved for demolition at this stage. Am I right? It's subject to what happens with this application?
There was an application for a conservation area application for the demolition of the hotel, which was refused because at the same time as this application was refused. For conservation area consent for a building like this to be demolished, to be granted, then an approved scheme has to be in place for a building to replace the demolished building. So if committee were to take the view that this is acceptable and were to grant permission, then the applicants would have to apply again for a conservation area consent to demolish the building.
Okay, fine. And if I could just ask you another question, it's a very subjective question, I think you might not be able to answer, but you've obviously seen the site. I've been there to see it. My thought or question would be, do you feel, and it's a subjective one, that anybody who wanted to use the site for anything, forget this, that site, that hotel would have to be demolished? It's too far gone really to do anything with it. That's a subjective question, but a general answer on that one, please, if you could.
You're right. It was subjective because there's no there is no building survey to suggest one way or the other. From my own view of the building when I visited, the original building, which is the most attractive, looks in quite poor condition. The extensions going further down the hill don't look in as bad condition, but aren't particularly attractive.
Thank you very much. So let me see, members, if I may ask this now again. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Massey, if I ask you first.
I'm happy to approve the application. Sorry.
Are you happy to proceed?
Yes, sorry.
Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed, so I'll start on this one if I may. It's an unusual one for us to be looking at, to be fair, and it is working in a conservation area. So I feel in cases like this we need to ask three questions, in my view. What are we conserving in the first place? Does the project or the proposal outweigh those needs? And thirdly, what is the effect on the conservation area if we were to proceed? This is a high street. Obviously, it's not in the centre of Crieff, it's on the east side if you're coming out towards Perth. Buildings here, as we've seen on the photographs, are very different, traditional in their own way, but quite modern as well. So I feel to some extent the conservation side of it has been depleted to some way, but nonetheless, it's a conservation area. Secondly, does this outweigh the needs of conservation? And I think there's two parts to this. One is the existing building. That is in a dilapidated state. It's been empty since, I think, 2017. It's in a poor condition, as you've seen from the photographs. And I feel myself, to some extent, which I want to ask Mr. Burton, but to myself, that anybody coming in here, even another hotelier, I think would have to demolish that building. I think it's too far gone to refurbish in any way. And it is in a poor state. Winters, of course, have taken the toll. I suspect there's vermin housing itself inside. So the only way I think would be to demolish it. And the second part is what replaces it. And this is a cinema, and I think we'll go back in years when cinemas were in high streets, regular things to see in a high street. Maybe one screen, but this is going to have two screens and a radio hub and a bistro, come restaurant area. It will have a considerable economic benefit, I think, for this end of the high street, and it will certainly pay off for other businesses in the area. We can see from the map ahead of us that there are several businesses, restaurants and other houses and businesses there, which I'm sure will benefit from this being there. And what happens if we do agree it? Well, it is a contemporary design, most certainly, and it is to some extent pushing the envelope, I think, for this site. So my thoughts are, overall, that I think the economic benefits of this cinema would outweigh these of the conservation area. There are certain conditions I would like to talk about, perhaps when we get to that point. But overall, I think at this stage, I would be inclined to grant the appeal. I think it will benefit the area. It is contemporary design. It is, as I say, pushing the envelope. It will stand out undoubtedly, but then what business doesn't want to stand out? But I think the economic benefits, reusing the site, demolishing a building which is in decay and is going to get worse and worse and become probably a health hazard in due course. Given it's 6 years since closure and nothing's happened, that's the first thing to come along, I think, with a definite proposal. As I say, I'm happy to grant, but we'll discuss conditions if my two colleagues agree. So I'm over to you, Councillor Massey.
Happy to grant.
And Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, it kind of makes my comments superfluous. Yeah, in principle, I mean, conservation areas are very important, I think, and I've done a lot in the past to defend buildings in conservation areas. But conservation areas aren't about fixing things in aspic and not allowing things to develop and change. I've been to the site, I've looked at the buildings around about. This isn't the centre of Crieff, it's off to the east, east side, yes. And looking at the houses, the buildings around there, they're not quite the same architectural merit as the ones in the town centre. In terms of the Crieff itself, there's 2 or 3 hotels that are falling down and falling apart. And my view on this is that a new building like this, and I actually quite like the design, it's got a sort of 1920s feel as you're coming into the town from the east. And I'm actually quite jealous. I wouldn't mind having something similar to this in Kinross somewhere. So I would very much want to uphold the appeal.
Fine, thank you very much. So we have a unanimous decision, Mr. Fogg. I think we need to talk about some conditions on here, but
Yeah, 5th time lucky. You indicated you have some views on conditions, convener.
yeah, I think that the conditions I would be thinking about, it wasn't really discussed across in the paper, but to do with noise, I think this is a factor of some sort of noise management control put in place. There's no discussion about times of opening times, but my colleagues might have a view, but I think normally cinemas normally end around about 11 o'clock at night, but I'm not sure if that's, they have made better views. I'm not a regular cinema goer, so I can't say that. The one other point I did want to time with times is the fact, and this was a comment made by several people, there's a bistro being incorporated in it, and I would like to think that the closing time of that will be before the last film, which would encourage people to disperse from the cinema, not hang around. And the other point, which was picked up, and I think the applicants agreed, is that we could utilise, we have to discuss get approval of the materials to be used, the planning, but utilise as much of the old building materials as possible. And I believe the applicants did actually say they would agree to that. And they were the sort of the conditions I'm thinking of. My colleagues may have other thoughts that they want to add in.
You convener commented on the PKHT request for a archaeological site survey prior to any building commencing, which I think is one that's relevant to this as opposed to the demolition application.
Yes, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think the 2 points raised by Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust relate to the demolition side. Yeah. To this side, yes, yeah. So I think we have a unanimous approval for this. I don't have any comments from other colleagues anymore. No. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I think hopefully we'll all have a chance to go and see it when it's built. As long as they put a good Western on, I'll be there. No worries. Okay, thank you, members. We'll move on now to item. I've got to find my place. Number 5 now, which is the installation of solar panels at Apple Tree House, the Ross, Comrie. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce that one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures as usual. The first slide shows was there not a okay, right, that's the first slide. There's usually an aerial view. I apologize for that not being there. And the first slide then shows the application property on the left-hand side of the picture there in the Ross, which is a narrow a narrow road with no footpath, with traditional buildings, mostly traditional buildings on both sides. The application building has a substantial front garden between it and the road, and you can see it's set at an angle from the corner. Next slide, please. That's taken from the road, so the house is at an angle. You can see it's of not as traditional design as some of the other houses in the vicinity, and it has. You can see from the picture there. It also has contour tiles as opposed to flat slate tiles. Next slide, please. Looking at it from the side, you can see the house is clad in a timber appearance cladding. Other houses in the Ross are either render or stone. Next slide, please. And looking beyond the house, further down the road, you can see the area is characterised by fairly substantial two-storey dwellings of traditional design and appearance. Next slide, please. Looking back up the road, you can see the corner of the application house on the left there, and that's looking back. You can see on the other side of the road there's a traditional stone cottage. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's okay. So planning permission is sought for the installation of solar panels on the southeast facing part of the roof of Apple Tree House, an unlisted detached house sited within the Ross Conservation Area, Comrie. House is two-storey, modern design, set at an angle to the road within a substantial garden. The house is finished in horizontal coloured cladding and has contoured concrete roof tiles. The solar panels are proposed to cover the roof, with the exception of a narrow strip at each end of the roof and a strip near the centre where the house has a chimney. The panels would be black. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicants are cognizant of the government's aims of mitigating climate change and want to make use of their house's southeast facing aspect by installing solar panels. The house was built in 1976 and, unlike many other houses on the Ross, is set at an angle to the road, which means it doesn't form part of the built street frontage. Its situation on an inside corner of the road means that an open view of the roof is limited to a short 60-metre stretch of the public road. The view of the front of the house is also partially screened by the large mature front garden and boundary treatment. Because of this, the panels would not have a visually intrusive appearance and would not give rise to a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. To summarise the report of handling, the proposed solar panels would dominate and overwhelm the roof, introducing modern technology which has an uncharacteristic appearance over the majority of its surface. As noted by the Council's conservation planner, this would result in a visually intrusive appearance which would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. The introduction of renewable energy generation would undoubtedly make a positive contribution towards the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and associated climate change impacts, but this does not outweigh the harm that the proposal would cause to the heritage sensitivities in the surrounding built environment. Approval would therefore be contrary to paragraph 143 of Scottish Planning Policy, Historic Environment Scotland Guidance on Micro-Renewables and Roofs, Policies 2 and 9 of TAPLAN, and Policies 1A, 1B, 17C and 28A of the Local Development Plan, which all seek to ensure that development contributes positively to its surroundings in order to respect the character and amenity of the place and the character and appearance of the conservation area. There were no public representations. Material considerations. Policies 1A and 1B, 17C and 28A of the Local Development Plan are relevant, as is Historic Environment Policy for Scotland 2019. The delegated report refers to Scottish Planning Policy. This has since been superseded by National Planning Framework 4, which I will cover in observations. National Planning Framework 4 seeks to encourage, promote and facilitate the development that minimises emissions and adapts to the current and future impacts of climate change. Policy 2 states that development proposals to retrofit measures to existing developments that reduce emissions or support adaptation to climate change will be supported. Policy 7 of National Planning Framework 4 seeks to protect historic assets. The relevant part of the policy states development proposals in or affecting conservation areas will only be supported where the character and appearance of the conservation area and its setting is preserved or enhanced. So relevant considerations include here the 1, architectural and historic character of the area, 2, existing density, built form and layout, and 3, the context and siting, quality of design and suitable materials. The judgment before the committee is therefore one of balancing the climate change agenda with the protection of the character and appearance of Ross Conservation Area. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Cuthbert, any questions?
Yeah, just one, convener. I'm just wondering what colour the roof tiles are. Are they sort of a grey colour or are they a brownish colour?
They're brown from memory, Councillor. Maybe we could go back to, I think, the first slide. Yeah, they're quite hard to tell from that too. They're kind of browny grey, I guess. From memory, they were more brown than grey.
Thank you.
Councillor Massey.
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions on this one either. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require any further information? Councillor Cuthbert.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Massey.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. Councillor Cuthbert, if you could lead off on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. Again, this is another conservation area one. My view on this one is that I went and looked at the site. I had trouble seeing the building. I had to park further up the street and then walk round the corner to actually see it because you're driving round the corner. So when you're in the car, you never see the building. The roof is, I think, the only one locally that's got these contoured concrete tiles. So I don't quite know how it was consented originally, but there you go. That's another matter. My view is that if you put the solar array on the roof, basically it's going to change the color to more of a black color, and it's going to look more like slate than it does at the moment. So I actually think it might enhance the area. I also think we need to think carefully about MPF4 and how the influence it has in this situation. So I'm actually minded to agree with the appeal.
And Councillor Mess.
I'm happy to agree with the appeal as well.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I too, I think I'm in this case looking to agree. It's a conservation area, and that's a question of what we're conserving again. It's the amenity, I think, and the peace and tranquility of the area. It's a beautiful part of the world to go to, over Stonebridge, and you're into this this locale, which is cut off by the river, to be honest. A small hamlet in its own right. Very, very pleasant place to be and to live, and I'm sure the people who live there are very fortunate. These are solar panels which will be dark coloured. They will flush to the roof. I can't see that they would in any way denigrate from the locale. I think it's part of the world we're living at the moment, which we need to encourage climate change and mitigation. I'm sure this will obviously help the owners reduce their bills, electric bills, but the overriding effect is to minimise emissions. And I think personally, the more houses which have these solar panels, obviously the better, and I think they should be encouraged wherever possible, financially and otherwise. So on this occasion, I am happy to concur with my colleagues and grant the appeal. Mr. Fogg, anything to follow on that one? So have a unanimous answer on that one. So thank you, members. We'll now move on to number 4.6, which is the alterations to a dwelling house at Burnham Cottage, Perth Road in Burnham. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Take us through the pictures. You can see the application property outlined in red. It is very close to the terrace of 3 houses immediately to the north of it. There's a shared courtyard to the rear of it and a public road to the front of it. On the other side of the public road, there's a small stream and parkland to the other side of that. To the south, is the former fire station. Next slide, please. So you can see the application property is whitewashed render, very traditional looking cottage with a traditional tiled roof. Next slide, please. That's the other side of the cottage, which the front door is in it. So this is the side facing the courtyard, not facing the public road. Next slide, please. And looking down towards the adjacent cottages, you can see that the cottage is single story with a small detailed upper floor element at its centre. Next slide, please. And there's you can see there's a gap between the cottage, the application cottage, and the buildings immediately adjacent. Next slide, please. And this is looking towards the end of the road, looking past the wall of the cottage. You can see there are some new buildings just not recently erected on the other side of the main road. Next slide, please. And there's some more buildings under construction adjacent. The wall that you can see on the left-hand side of the picture there is one of the walls, is the corner wall of the buildings that are adjacent to the cottage. I think that's all the slides now. Yeah. So, permission is sought for the replacement of roof slates on a single-storey detached house in the Burnham Conservation Area, Dunkeld. The application property, Burnham Cottage, is located adjacent to, but is separate from, a group of 3 cottages, Ladybell cottages, which are listed Category C. The application property is not listed. It is proposed to replace the existing Scottish slate with Spanish slate, which is larger than Scottish slate and more uniform in shape. To summarise the applicant's case, the roof currently leaks, causing damage to internal ceilings. A repair is urgently required. The cottage is not listed, and there are no new Scottish slates available. It's not possible to reuse the existing slates on part of the roof because of the condition of the slates and the diminishing courses design of the roof. Other new and refurbished properties in Burnham Conservation Area have been re-roofed using Spanish slates. To summarise the report of handling, Burnham Cottage is a Category C listed building which forms part of the group of historically significant buildings at Ladybell Cottages. The property is also located within the Burnham Conservation Area. 2 roof-like windows are proposed which don't raise any cause for concern. It's also proposed to replace the slated roof covering. The existing roof covering comprises Scottish slate, which has varying widths and is laid in diminishing courses. The proposed replacement roof covering is heavy Spanish slate of regular width and coursing. There is a presumption in favour of the retention of historic fabric in the listed building, as this is the best method of preserving its character and special interest. The applicant was advised at pre-application stage that any application should be accompanied by a roof condition survey, which assesses the condition of the roof and quantifies the amount of slate which is capable of being reused. The application has been submitted without a roof condition survey, therefore it hasn't been demonstrated that there is a requirement to replace the entire roof covering, which benefits from statutory protection. The proposal seeks to install Spanish slate of regular width and coursing on both the rear and principal elevations. This would create a uniform appearance which is out of character with the listed building and does not have due regard to its special interests. No representations were received. Material considerations, policies 1A, 1B, C and 17C and 28A of Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, which seek to ensure that alterations respect the amenity of the place, the character and appearance of the conservation area, are material. Observations, despite being identified as a listed building on the Council's website, Historic Environment Scotland have confirmed that the application property is not listed. The judgment therefore is whether the replacement of a Scottish slate roof with Spanish slates would be detrimental to the character and appearance of Burnham Conservation Area. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll open to questions. Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First of all, can you buy new Scottish slates?
I understand that there are no quarries producing new Scottish slates, Councillor, and the the only way to purchase Scottish slate now is to purchase reconditioned slate.
And the second question is this question of the roof condition survey. I presume that was put in there because it was assumed to be listed. I presume that if one has a house in a conservation area, it doesn't mean you've got to have a roof condition survey.
I think that's the case, Councillor, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Massey?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions now. Mine's been asked by Councillor Cuthbert, so that's out as it goes. So, members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Massey?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed, and on this occasion I'll start for a change. There's no doubt, I think, if you visit the property and from the photographs, that the roof needs to be replaced. The slates are failing. And obviously, from the information we've had, this is not a listed building, and therefore the roof survey was obviously put in place, or the condition, the requirement was because it was a listed building, which it is not. Therefore, I feel, given the state of the roof, it does need to be replaced. I'm happy to grant the appeal. I would think a condition put in there that we do use Spanish slate, which had been proposed anyway, but just to cover that eventuality. But happy to grant the appeal. Councillor Massey?
I'm happy to grant the appeal.
And Councillor Cuthbert?
I think you said everything, Convener. I'm happy to grant the appeal. I would say that it should be either Spanish slates or Welsh slates, but it should be slates.
So we have a unanimous decision again, Mr. Fogg. We seem to be going through this quite easily today on the unanimous decisions. Okay, so we're happy with that. Fine. Okay, so members will now move on to the last paper of the day, which is number 5.1, which is a property which has come back. Mr. Burton, I'll ask you to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. Some members of the committee will remember this application was before the local review body before, and it was deferred for a bat survey. I wasn't able to visit the application site the first time, but I've been to see it this time, so the photographs are new and hopefully will help the committee reach a decision. The first slide, please. You can see on the top of the picture the application site picked out in red, so you can see it's very much isolated on its own away from Kinnaird Village. Next slide, please. Application site boundary in red. The actual cottage is the farmhouse is the top part of the building you can see there. The lower part is outbuildings, some of which are in a poor state of repair. Next slide, please. So the road leading to the application site is long and single track, as you can see. It's not one which would be, the site wouldn't be accessible to people generally. And the only people using this track will be people actually going to the farmhouse. Next slide, please. Looking back down the road from the gate to the property, you can see beyond the gate it's a single track road, and there are no buildings within sight. Next slide, please. Now, in this slide, you can just about make out the top of the roof of the building within the trees at the end of the road there. Next slide, please. Yeah, the building is a bit clearer in this one as you get closer to it. You can see it's nestled very much within the hills surrounding it, which the applicant owns and farms sheep on. Next slide, please. So looking back down the road from the parking area in front of the house, you can see it is extremely isolated. Next slide, please. A view from the parking area in front of the house shows the it's significantly higher than the surrounding area. Next slide, please. So this is looking into the garden of the house, if you like, which is just above it, just to the side of it. It's used as an allotment. Next slide, please. And looking down from directly in front of the house, you can see it's a lot of wooded land between it and the farmland beyond. Next slide, please. So the house itself was originally a small cottage. It's been extended at least once, most recently in the 1990s, when the bay window extension you could see was added, and another extension was added to the rear. Next slide, please. You can see the original shape of the cottage, the gable and an extension to the rear in this picture. Next slide, please. And at the rear of the house, you can see the rear extension projecting beyond the back of the original cottage. Next slide, please. And if you look beyond the house, you can see outbuildings that are attached to the house. The ones closest to the house are in poor repair and don't actually have a roof. Next slide, please. There's the original house and extension, and it's attached to the outbuildings, which, as you can see, are in a very poor state of repair. Next slide, please. The outbuildings, these ones aren't used. There are outbuildings to the left-hand side of that picture, which are used by the applicant. Next slide, please. And from above, you can see the cottage within its setting and the outbuildings that are attached to it. I think that's the last slide. Yes. Okay. So planning permission is sought for an extension to the dwelling house and erection of a porch at Sunny Hall, Kinnaird. A side extension is proposed to the farmhouse, which can't be seen from the public road. The extension, the house is single storey and currently has a bedroom, kitchen, dining room, living room and bathroom. It is attached to extensive outbuildings. The extension proposed would be attached to the gable of the existing house and would add 2 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, a reception, drawing room and boot room linen rooms. A conservatory is also proposed to the rear of the house and a porch to the front. The extension would match the height of the existing house and the materials proposed would match the existing. Because the extension would be wider than the existing house, a mansard roof is proposed to ensure that the roof height matches that existing. To summarise the applicant's case, taking account of the entirety of the full extent of the buildings on site, the farmhouse and outbuildings, the extension is not considered to overwhelm the existing structure as is claimed. The roof height and materials have been chosen to match the existing house while creating a house which will continue to meet the needs of the applicant. To summarise the report of handling, the extension proposed in the east elevation seeks to form a second level by doubling the planned depth of the original cottage. This would create an increased roof volume and the proportions of the extension would be excessive in comparison to the original cottage. The proportions, scale and visual massing of the extensions, taken cumulatively, would overwhelm the modest cottage and would detract from its character and appearance. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies 1A and 1B placemaking. The roof of the cottage has the potential for bat roosts. As no bat survey has been submitted, it's not possible to assess any potential impact on bats and bat roosts, so the application is contrary to policy 41 of the local development plan. No representations were received to the application. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B placemaking and material, policy 41 biodiversity is also potentially relevant if there are any protected species such as bats which would be affected by the proposed extensions. Some observations: the building which is proposed to be extended was originally a small cottage which has previously been extended in order to provide a reasonable quality of accommodation. The committee must decide whether the extensions proposed here would have an unacceptable impact on the building as it is. An addendum to this, the application was deferred in December last year for further information from the Council's Biodiversity Officer to clarify why a bat survey would be required. Members can see on pages 433 and 434 of the papers the response, which says that the structure in this application demonstrates potential to be used by bats due to its age and location, 74 metres from woodland, so meets some triggers in Annex B, Bat Survey Trigger List of the Perth and Kinross Council Bat Survey Advice. Annex B is a list of triggers, any one of which advises that a bat survey is carried out when planning permission is sought. The most relevant trigger is 1(3). This trigger reads, pre-1960 detached buildings and structures within 200 metres of woodland. The original cottage was built before 1960s, but it's noted that 2 extensions were added in the 1990s. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Massey, any questions?
Just one that said, the bit that you quoted there from the 433, page 433, it says a preliminary roost assessment can be done. Would that be instead of a bat survey, or?
Yes, you're quite right, Councillor. It says at the bottom of that page, in line with the PKC Bat Survey guidance and Bat Conservation Trust Good Practice Guidelines, a preliminary roost assessment should be undertaken. And that can be done prior to the active bat season of May to August. So yes, I would agree with you, Councillor. That would be a potential way forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert?
No, I have no questions.
I don't think I have any questions either. I noticed just to clarify, on page 435, we've had a letter from the agent for the applicant that mentions that bats are unlikely to be there, but it's more likely they're in the outbuilding. So your feelings are a bat roost survey would be suffice in this occasion?
In line with the Council's the response from the Tree and Biodiversity Officer, as quoted by Councillor Cuthbert, then yes.
Well, given that we've got no further questions, then members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we require more information? Councillor Massey.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused. I think what we're after is a bit more information in that we need a bat roost survey before we can decide on this one.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct, Convener. My advice is it wouldn't actually be lawful for you to grant where you're minded to approve. I think you're prevented from doing so by the absence of survey or even a roost survey to address more fully a protected species.
So I think at this stage what we're looking for is are we in a situation where members want to refuse, or are they happy to defer again for this roost survey? So I think that's where we are. So Councillor Cuthbert, your thoughts?
I propose to defer.
Councillor Massey?
I agree, defer.
Yep, I think I'm in the concur with my colleagues. I don't like to have to defer a case again, which we've already done once, but I think it looks like a bat roost survey will be quicker and I think less costly, and it will allow us then to look at proceedings. So I think we can defer now for a bat roost survey, and we're all in agreement with that. Mr. Fogg? Well, that brings us to the end of today's local review body. Remains only for me to thank my two colleagues, Councillor Cuthbert, Councillor Massey. His first time on the LRB, so I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully come back again. Mr. Burton, Mr. Fogg, and Jess, thank you all very much for your help today. And we'll see you on the next one next month. Thank you.